Hi, I'm Kim Copperthwaite. I'm an English language arts teacher at Freeport Middle School in Freeport, Maine. I'm a teaching consultant and I'm doing curriculum development for peace literacy. In this video, I'd like to review with you how I taught Lesson 1 of the Peace Literacy Unit, Navigating Crisis, Uncertainty, and Technology in a Global Pandemic. This is a new unit that was designed to address the COVID-19 pandemic and written specifically for middle school students. The unit was written by Paul K. Chappell, Peace Literacy and Leadership Director at the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, by Stephanie Clapes, Learning Specialist and Educational Consultant, and by Donna Cowell, Curriculum Specialist. All of the pieces of this unit, which include 3 lessons, a teaching guide, and some really beautiful slide presentations, can be found for free at peaceliteracy.org under Curriculum. I'd like to walk you through how I taught Lesson 1 with my students. I taught the entire unit online. I used it to end my 7th grade year. We had ended, like most people in the country, by going full online teaching. And it was a great way to end the year. Students were getting a little bit weary with regular sorts of schoolwork, and this was something different and very, very much needed for them emotionally. So Lesson 1 is called Navigating Through the Storm. I identified 2 essential questions that I posed to students. How do we cope through this crisis, and how do we help one another in the crisis? So the slide presentation includes a lot of really beautiful thematic moving pictures or GIFs. And when you start this with your students, please make sure that you tell them to play it on present so they can see some of the movement. At first, when they start working with these slides, they will look at them simplistically. I think kids are very used to moving very quickly through online presentations or videos. And for all of these lessons, I would recommend that you ask students to slow down and work on their skills of observation and deep thinking. So part 1 of this lesson starts out as an allegory of a ship at sea in a storm. It's used as a metaphor for the COVID-19 pandemic. Students will start out exploring their inner world, their feelings, their anxieties, what they're noticing about themselves internally. They'll also be asked to look at what's happening in the outer world, and then consider what happens when we have an intersection of our inner world and our outer world, and then how do we help each other cope. I'm sharing with you here the directions that I gave to students. The way that I taught this is I would do a mini lesson of really just about 5 minutes introducing the lesson, and then I would put this up on Google Classroom as well, giving them a very clear and concise list of directions for them to look back on. So the first thing that I asked students to do was to view the slide presentation up to just slide 8. I asked them to stop and really think about each of the slides and the idea of personal thinking versus global events, what is happening in your inner world, your feelings, and your outer world. I asked them to reread and think about all the questions that are in the slide presentation. How is the storm, the global pandemic, affecting the outer world? How is the storm affecting their inner world, and how do the 2 overlap? Then I wanted them to do something more than just think about it or discuss it or just respond in writing. So I asked them to draw a Venn diagram or some other type of illustration that shows the inner and outer, the inner thinking, the outer thinking about the pandemic. I gave them my own sample that I did in my own sketchbook, and I reviewed this on a video lesson with them. And I just did it a little bit differently, not a traditional Venn diagram by any means, and I really wanted students to look at it a little differently. They certainly could do a plain old Venn diagram, or they could do something that used the metaphor of the ship. So here I made my outer world, my inner world, the water was the overlapping part. So I got a variety of responses. I did get a couple plain old Venn diagrams, but I have to say for the most part, students got more creative and wanted to create illustrations based on the theme of water or a boat. So here's one sample of a girl who put herself as her inner world. She put her inner world thoughts as the water. She did a cloud over her head, which represented the outer world, maybe raining down on her or about to rain down at her. And then the air all around her were the overlapping pieces of the world. All right, so I do have students that truly go off on their own. This one created a banana split boat that she put in the middle, and she did her different categories based on what's in a banana split, and she talked a little bit about COVID-19, and she showed her understanding of it in her own unique way. I would encourage your students to do the same. So after they finished that part, I moved them on to part 2. So I broke lesson 1 into 2 pieces, and I really wanted to slow kids down. They have a tendency at the middle school level to kind of rush through things. So I really slowed them down and had them just concentrate on the first 8 slides and then the next few. So the next part, I had them do something else. So here are the directions. I asked them to carefully view and read the slide presentation to the end. On slide 14 of this lesson, there are 6 prompts, and I asked them to think about them. They help them think of advice that you could give another person to get through the storm of the pandemic. Then what I did is I went on the application called Padlet, and I set up a Padlet just for them to think about some of the ways that they could help other people. So I'm going to just continue here before I show you the Padlet. Oh, no, I'm not. Went right into the Padlet. So here's the Padlet that I set up. Across the top, I put the questions that appeared in the slide presentation. How to not be bored and make your day more interesting. How to spend your time well. And how to feel less anxious or help others feel less anxious. How to be a good friend. And how can you support others? Family, friends, neighbors, teachers, and I added animals. I'm not sure that was on the slide. Animals in your community. Pets are big in 7th grade. Underneath, students, if you're not familiar with Padlet, each student can reply underneath and give some advice. So if I showed you the whole Padlet, you would see multiple responses below. I asked students to respond to 3 of these columns with some of their ideas on how they were coping. And I also asked them to go in and comment on one another. The reason I had this set up in this format is to duplicate what we would naturally do in a classroom, where we would share, give each other feedback. That's harder in an online format, but I wanted to keep that flow of community, so I set these questions up as a Padlet. So the learning outcomes of part 1. Well, first of all, as I looked through their Venn diagrams or the way they set up their illustrations to demonstrate their understanding of inner world, outer world, and overlap, I began to see evidence of dialectical thinking, and this I find really exciting when I see it in middle school students. And that is the idea that they can take 2 opposing things and come to some sort of reasoning within themselves about that. There are some adults who are still not able to do that skill, and I think it's a major step moving toward becoming young adults. So kids were able to say things like, I'm really upset, I really want to see my friends, I feel so lonely, and hold that feeling, and also talk about what they were hearing on the news in the outer world, that they had to socially distance, and then in the middle, how they reconcile that feeling, where they're coming up with ways to cope with both those 2 feelings. I saw a maturation in their responses to one another for advice and in their diagrams and illustrations of moving beyond kind of the small world of their self, saying, I miss my friends, I want to be back at school, but also developing a more mature understanding of this is a very big deal in the world that we're all coping with. They developed skills in creating effective visual representations of their thinking. Now, I have to say, some of them were not so great that came in because kids were working at home without a lot of guidance. So some of them just took a pencil and drew plain Venn diagrams and kind of missed the concepts a little bit. And others did just some beautiful, colorful pictures. Most of all, kids had the learning outcome of how do we cope in a crisis, and how do we help one another? Sorry about that typo. How do we help one another? I'll fix that. So that was the big learning that came out of this. So I encourage you to try lesson 1. Get students working creatively, thinking creatively, and talking about what they're experiencing during this pandemic. Again, this can be done online or in a classroom setting.